There are so many ways to start a painting, and in this case, I'm showing how you can start a painting by drawing in paint with an earth tone. So you can also do an underdrawing in regular drawing media, such as colored pencil, but in some cases, we like to just jump right in and use the paint. So what you see me doing here is picking points from all over the composition. I think of this as picking at least one north, a south, an east, and a west, a top, a bottom, a left, and a right. That helps me to make sure that everything is going to fit onto the canvas that I want to fit onto the canvas, and work out some compositional big areas before moving on. And then, as you see, the next step starting here is to really just block in major lit and shadow, or dark and light areas. And by blocking those in, again, I can see if the painting is working or going in the right direction, but I can also work out some proportions. You'll see that I softened it there, and that is because I felt myself getting tempted to work into details and try to get everything perfectly correct when I still need to stay on those macro areas, making sure that the drawing makes sense in a macro sense. And now that the darker areas are blocked in, I'm just marking a few areas that are lighter. So I'll come back to the lits later, but I just want to make some mental notes here where I'm capturing that certain areas are brighter than others. So now what you see is, after I've blocked in the major shapes in a singular tone of dark, I'm now looking in and looking for the darkest darks. And those are going to appear in some pretty predictable places. First, dark objects that are in shadow, where there's a shadow cast by something else. So cast shadows tend to be pretty dark. You may also find that the occlusion, that's where the light is occluded underneath an object, so it's within the cast shadow, is going to be very dark. You may also find that the terminator, where the light terminates as it's rounding an object, or at the edge of a leaf, for example, you may see a sudden dark area. So I'm emphasizing those darkest darks and putting those in. Now, one of the things that helps me do at this stage, those darkest darks, particularly the small ones, help me see if the proportions are reasonably correct. Remember that with paint, you can always correct later. It's easy to wipe out and change it. But the major proportions do need to be correct, because when you do need to move something later, you'll probably have to move a bunch of other stuff at the same time. Which brings us to, why would you do a drawing in paint? You don't have to work this way. You can just start painting. You can just do a quick block in and work out the drawing slowly while you're working in color at the same time. For a lot of painters, it helps to separate those concerns, to work on one thing at a time, because it really focuses the mind. And by having some type of drawing, an underdrawing in paint or an underdrawing in some other media, that can relax the painter so that they can then focus on color next, or texture, or brushwork, or edges. In other cases, some people find that takes away from the painting for them. It may take away the spontaneity. So this can be a little bit of a balance. When drawing in paint, I can create more softness than I might end up with if I do a drawing in another drawing media. So what you just saw there is that I noticed that some major proportions just weren't correct. And even though they only needed to be moved about 10 or 15%, it really is easier to just wipe out a whole area and rework it. As a matter of fact, before starting the demo, in the first, I would say 3 minutes or so, I wiped out at least 3 times or more, so much that when my husband edited this video, he started laughing at how many times I wiped it out. So here you can see that now that I've got the major shapes worked out to be reasonably correct, they're about 90-95% correct, so everything is fitting onto the canvas, the shapes make sense, that the base of that plant enters the pot at the right location, so I know that I'm not too terribly off. Now I can move on to the next step, which is to carve out the brightest lights. So those may be lit areas, or they just may be light objects, and I'm looking for the brightest ones, and I'm only calibrating them a little bit if you want to take a drawing all the way, you can really start to calibrate those. In this case, this is like more of like a rough drawing or even an oil sketch. You can think of it that way. So, so you might ask, well, why would you do this way instead of just putting white paint on it? Which, by the way, is another way to draw in paint and it is totally legitimate. But in this case, what I'm doing is I'm wetting a very clean, unused, it's never been touched with any oil paint, brush that's dipped in some Gamsol and some walnut oil, and I'm using it to clean off the paint that's already there. What that does for me is it helps me start to see the lit pattern, and it's a double check to make sure that the composition and the value range and everything is making sense and that objects are in the right relationship to each other in the overall composition. Frankly, it's also just kind of pretty and fun because now we have a wide range of values. Or it's a very simple range, but it's gotten wider. So we have a mid-tone, then we have the darks put in, then we have some lit areas showing up, and now we have our brightest brights showing up. So as I start to put in those brightest brights and those darkest darks, I can really see the drawing working itself out. Now, with an approach like this, some painters will let this completely dry and use it as a map to build the other painting on top of it. If you do that, then you would take this drawing a lot further to make sure it's exactly what you want. One of the reasons that I do this on some paintings is I do like that texture that shows through of this underdrawing in the shadow areas, and I'll sometimes focus on just the lit areas, and that's where I'll paint. There are some disadvantages to doing that, one of which is you end up with a lot of this earth tone, whatever your earth tone is in a painting. Which brings us to, you can use any color for an underdrawing. So what I'm doing here in an earth tone, you can also do in hot pink or purple or blue. As a matter of fact, I considered doing this in purple just for fun. So as many ways as there are to paint, there are probably almost as many, if not equally many ways to do an underdrawing or prepare your painting. Now we're coming into the conclusion of the demo here, and I'm just wrapping up by choosing some final lits. And I'm making a decision not to take this painting much further because I don't want it to get fussy. It was just fun to create that arc and some shapes and a little bit of texture.